I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to betray her husband. But when my brother-in-law whispered, "You've always been the one I wanted," in the dark of our family cabin, I felt something I couldn't ignore. And it changed everything. My name is Sarah Johnson, and for years, my life was the definition of stability. I had it all: a loving husband, 2 beautiful kids, and a cozy home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My husband, Michael, was the kind of man everyone admired: hardworking, dependable, and devoted to our family. He was a financial analyst who spent long hours at the office, but he always made time for us. On the surface, we were the perfect family, the couple everyone looked up to. But behind closed doors, something was missing. Michael and I had fallen into a routine that felt more like a script than a marriage. The passion that once defined us had faded, replaced by a comfortable but unremarkable rhythm. I told myself it was normal, that every marriage goes through phases. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living someone else's life, not mine. That's when my brother-in-law, David, came into the picture. David was Michael's younger brother, and he was everything Michael wasn't: wild, unpredictable, and full of life. He had just returned to town after years of traveling, his tan skin and easy smile a stark contrast to Michael's serious demeanor. David moved into our guest room temporarily, and his presence brought a whirlwind of energy into our quiet home. At first, I welcomed the change. David was charming and funny, always cracking jokes that made the kids laugh, and even brought a smile to Michael's face. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice the way David looked at me. His gaze lingering a little too long, his compliments a little too personal. It made me feel something I hadn't felt in years: alive. And that's when everything started to unravel. It started with small things: David's lingering glances, the way his hand would brush against mine when he passed me a cup of coffee. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But the more I tried to ignore it, the harder it became. There was a tension between us, an unspoken pull that I couldn't explain. One evening, after the kids were asleep and Michael was working late, David and I found ourselves alone in the living room. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. He sat close to me on the couch, his knee barely touching mine, and I felt my heart race. "You've always been different, Sarah," he said, his voice low and steady. "Different from anyone I've ever known." I should have pulled away, should have laughed it off, and changed the subject. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, my breath catching in my throat. "David, we can't," I started, but he cut me off. "Can't what?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine. "Can't admit that there's something here? Something real?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down I knew he was right. There was something between us, something dangerous and undeniable. But it wasn't just about David, it was about me. For the first time in years I felt seen, wanted, alive. And that scared me more than anything. From that night on, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, sent a jolt of electricity through me. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. The line between right and wrong was blurring, and I was teetering on the edge. The tension between David and me grew with each passing day. It was in the way he leaned in a little too close when we talked, the way his voice dropped to a whisper when he said my name. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, just a fleeting attraction that would fade with time. But the truth was, it was anything but harmless. One afternoon, while Michael was at work and the kids were at school, David found me in the kitchen. I was washing dishes, my hands deep in soapy water, when I felt him behind me. His breath was warm on my neck as he reached around me to grab a towel. "You're always so busy, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but laced with something deeper. "When do you ever take time for yourself?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm fine," I managed to say, though my voice trembled. "I don't need time for myself." David didn't move. He stayed there, his body inches from mine, and I could feel the heat radiating off him. "You deserve more than this," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "You deserve to feel alive." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. For years, I had buried my desires, my dreams, under the weight of responsibility. But now, with David so close, I couldn't ignore the ache inside me. I turned to face him, my hands still wet and soapy, and our eyes met. In that moment, everything else faded away, the kitchen, the dishes, even Michael. It was just David and me, and the undeniable pull between us. "This is wrong," I whispered, though my body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly toward him. "Is it?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or is it the most right thing we've ever felt?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and part of me wanted to jump. David reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend I don't feel this. Neither could I. But as much as I wanted to give in, I knew the consequences would be devastating. The question was, how long could I resist? The breaking point came on a stormy night. Michael was out of town for a work conference, and the kids were staying at a friend's house. The house felt eerily quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought, every doubt, every desire. David and I were alone, and the tension between us was unbearable. We sat in the living room, the flickering light of the TV casting shadows on the walls. Neither of us was paying attention to the screen. The air between us was thick, charged with unspoken words and forbidden feelings. I could feel David's eyes on me, and when I finally looked at him, I saw the same hunger I felt reflected in his gaze. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We can't keep doing this. Pretending like there's nothing between us." I shook my head, trying to push down the emotions threatening to spill over. "David, we can't. This is wrong. You're my brother-in-law. Michael's brother. This would destroy everything." He leaned closer, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Maybe it's wrong," he said, his voice trembling. "But it feels right, doesn't it?" I wanted to deny it, to push him away and run upstairs, lock the door, and never look back. But I couldn't. The truth was, it did feel right, and that terrified me. Before I could stop myself, I leaned into his touch, my heart racing as his fingers traced the line of my jaw. "David," I whispered, my voice breaking. "We can't." But he didn't listen. Instead, he closed the distance between us, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and desire. For a moment, I let myself fall into it, the world around us dissolving into nothing. It was everything I had been fighting against, and yet, it felt like coming home. And then, the sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. We pulled apart, panic flooding through me as I turned to see Michael standing in the doorway, his face pale with shock. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in his eyes as he took in the scene before him. His wife and his brother, caught in a moment that could never be undone. "Michael," I stammered, my voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were meaningless. The truth was written all over our faces, in the guilt that hung heavy in the air. Michael didn't say a word. He just stood there, his expression a mix of betrayal and heartbreak, before turning and walking out into the storm. David and I sat in stunned silence, the weight of what we had done crushing us. The guilt was immediate, overwhelming. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and in doing so, I had destroyed the life I had worked so hard to build. The days that followed were a blur of guilt, anger, and heartbreak. Michael moved out of the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the crushing weight of what I had done. He didn't yell or scream, he didn't have to. The look of betrayal in his eyes was enough to haunt me every waking moment. David left too, disappearing without a word. I didn't know where he went, and I didn't have the courage to reach out. The bond between the brothers was shattered, and I was the one who had broken it. The kids, confused and hurt, kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I didn't have an answer for them. How could I explain that their mother had made a choice that destroyed their family? The guilt ate at me, a constant, gnawing presence that I couldn't escape. I replayed that night over and over in my mind, wondering what I could have done differently. But the truth was, I had made my choice, and now I had to live with the consequences. Michael filed for divorce, and the process was as painful as I had feared. Dividing our lives, our home, our memories, it felt like tearing apart a piece of myself. The worst part was seeing the hurt in his eyes every time we met, knowing that I was the cause of it. The kids struggled to adjust to the new reality. They were too young to understand the complexities of what had happened, but they felt the tension, the sadness that hung over our lives like a dark cloud. I tried to be strong for them, to rebuild some semblance of normalcy, but it was hard. Every time I looked at them, I was reminded of the life I had thrown away. As for David, I never saw him again. He became a ghost, a reminder of the mistake that had cost me everything. I often wondered if he felt the same guilt, the same regret. But I knew I would never get the chance to ask. In the end, I was left with nothing but the pieces of a life I had shattered. The weight of my choices was a burden I would carry forever, a constant reminder of the cost of temptation. Years have passed since that stormy night, but the scars remain. I've tried to rebuild my life, to find some semblance of peace, but the guilt never truly fades. Michael and I co-parent our children, though the distance between us is palpable. He's moved on, remarried, and found happiness again. I'm happy for him, truly, but it's a bittersweet reminder of what I lost. As for me, I've learned to live with my choices. I've thrown myself into being the best mother I can be, trying to make up for the pain I caused. But no amount of effort can erase the past. The kids are older now, and though they don't bring it up, I know they carry the weight of what happened in their own way. I've had time to reflect on that summer, on the choices I made, and the lives I shattered. I've come to understand that temptation is a dangerous thing. It whispers promises of fulfillment, of excitement, but it rarely shows you the cost until it's too late. I let myself believe that I deserved more, that I deserved to feel alive, but in doing so, I lost everything that truly mattered. The lesson I've learned is this: love and loyalty are fragile things, easily broken and nearly impossible to repair. A moment of weakness can undo years of trust, and the consequences can ripple through lives in ways you never imagined. I've made my peace with the past, but I'll always carry the weight of what I did. In the end, I've learned that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes it's just an illusion, and the price of chasing it is far too high. If you were in Sarah's position, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more gripping stories like this. You won't want to miss what's coming next.